Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 238. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about remote tropical beaches and sea cucumbers as we go to the Cook Islands.
Got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into today's interview, I do have some news for you, although I'm not going to be using traditional news stories. The one thing I did want to mention, though, is I'm recording this on Friday, July 2nd, and that's an important date for me because July 2nd, 5 years ago, was the first episode of The Amateur Traveler. I certainly can make no promises that I'll still be doing this show in 5 years. It will be interesting to see what the future holds, but I've been enjoying it and enjoying your participation as well. I'd like to give a special thanks to anybody who has been on the show as a guest. We had a meetup in New York City as part of the TBEX, the Travel Blog Exchange Conference, and there were a number of people who I got a chance to meet for the first time or to see again who have been on the show who were at that meetup. There were only 16 of us, but a high percentage had been on either the Amateur Traveler, and I think we had one guest for This Week in Travel who was also there. And since I picked up a cold in TBEX and I'm not sure you want to listen to me, and it's not that easy to record in between coughs, I'm going to keep the first part of this show and the end of this show relatively short. But I did want to say thanks so much for listening. I'd like to welcome to the show Melanie Waldman of TravelsWith2.com, who's come to talk to us about the Cook Islands. Melanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks for having me.
And you went to the Cook Islands, and honestly, I know the Cook Islands are in the Pacific, and I know that they're named after Captain Cook, and that's all I know. I don't know where they are in the Pacific.
They are in the dead center of the South Pacific. To the east is Tahiti, and to the west is Fiji.
Okay. And why the Cook Islands? They are not easy to get to, is my understanding.
No, absolutely not. Although simpler since Air New Zealand somewhat recently came out with a direct flight from Los Angeles. So suddenly They are approachable from the United States, but they really are only a 3.5-hour flight from Auckland, New Zealand.
And is that a daily flight, a weekly flight?
The LA flight is a daily flight,
Wow,
and
okay.
the Auckland flight, I am not 100% sure, but I believe there might be 2 flights a day.
Okay.
It's a popular spot for Kiwis.
And why the Cook Islands?
The Cook Islands, in a nutshell, it's pretty much the same water and sand as Tahiti, Moorea, Bora Bora, for a lot less. They use the currency of New Zealand, which at the moment, as we speak, I believe it's about $1.40 New Zealand dollars to every dollar American. And quite frankly, for us, that made a big difference. We were celebrating our 10th anniversary and knew we wanted to go big, so anything we could save was better.
And the language there would be predominantly English as the official language instead of French as in Tahiti.
Also a plus, yes, sir.
But we're still talking tropical paradise, sun-drenched beaches,
absolutely.
palm trees, grass skirts. I mean, how typical are we going here?
It's extremely typical in that respect. We are talking a Polynesian culture, so you're getting exactly the same kinds of foods and dances and tattoos and marae, the stone circle monuments that you're going to find in other parts of the Polynesian islands. Again, it's more remote. It's a little bit more like Hawaii in the 50s because it's not as populated for the most part. You're going to find a lot less French folks, even though they're there, than you're going to find in the French-speaking islands. So a lot more focus on New Zealand, Australia, England. It was interesting.
And what would you recommend for an itinerary? There are more than one island. And if I'm going for
Definitely
a
more
week,
than one island.
yeah, if I'm going for a week to 2 weeks, where would I fly in and where would you recommend I go? We obviously have to make some choices.
Sure, absolutely. If you have 2 or 3 weeks, you're in luck. We, unfortunately, only had inside of a week, including our travel time, which is very typical for us. If you have lots of time, you can play a little bit. It's best to fly into Raratonga. That's where the main hub airport is. Still going to be one of the smallest airports you've ever seen. There are chickens walking around, which I think is fantastic. There should always be chickens at the airport. Air Raratonga is the way to get around. There is no major cruise company at this time that does a entirely Cook Islands tour. So you can charter a boat, but do keep in mind that we're talking about a chunk of the South Pacific that's 2 million square miles with 15 small islands.
Okay.
It's definitely the kind of thing where you could well be needing a lot of insurance. You could well be needing to work on your swimming. I personally would go with Air Rarotonga.
So this isn't something like the Virgin Islands where I'd charter a boat and I could quickly sail between the individual islands. We're talking about hundreds of miles apart, it sounds like?
Hundreds of miles apart. One of the farthest islands from Raratonga, which is considered the hub and part of the largest island in the southern group of the 15 islands, the farthest island from there is over 800 miles away, which for someone from a very large country like us, 800 miles, you've done it before. We're talking 800 miles over open ocean. It's not necessarily the easiest to get to in a tiny boat. I think you've probably seen Gilligan's Island, and we all know how that worked out. So Air Rarotonga is kind of a funny, quirky way to go. I mean, there's like a few flights a week to different islands. Their site is really interesting. It's a fascinating chart to look at. You might necessarily find the flight of your dreams and the time of your dreams, but if the weather's not great that day, you might be out of luck for the next few days and kind of have to stay somewhere really remote. Most places require that you come back to either Aitutaki or Raratonga each time before you fly to separate islands. So allow me to explain that let's say you're out in the northern group, way, way, way far away, and you want to get to the next island, and you can't get a boat. You have to come all the way back 800 miles get your connecting flight, and then go all the way back. And these flights tend to be about $200 per person.
Okay.
For round-trip flights. So, not a lot of people go out to the farthest ones. They're pretty remote, and they're the source of a lot of legend and pearl farming.
Okay. So you did how many islands on your abbreviated trip here?
In my mind, I did about 6, and I had a wonderful time. In reality, I did 2, the 2 largest. I would have loved to go to the next smallest island in the southern group. We did Raratonga and Aitutaki, which are the 2 largest. And then there's a little one called Atu, which is full of a cave system, a bird that's only found there. Sounded absolutely amazing, just simply didn't have time. So someday I'd love to go back and really try to make this more of an odyssey for myself.
Okay. Well, let's start with Raratonga. What would I see there? What would I do?
Raratonga, definitely one of the highlights for us was taking Pa's cross-island trek. This guy is a complete trip. He's about 70 now. He is a Raratongan healer. He's the last of a 60-generation line of herbal healers. He's that guy who knows every plant on the island. He knows what it's called. He knows what it's used for. And just about every day, he takes people out across this trek, which is along the mountain spine of the island. And it kind of looks like a dragon's back because you're constantly seeing dragons. It's absolutely incredible to try to attempt this thing by yourself. There's no signs. There's no handrails. I would never try to do this by myself. Neither would my husband. And we were thrilled to have somebody to show us the way through a jungle that kind of reminded us of what you might think of as the Lost World. There were palm trees that were as big as a city bus and rushing rivers. So gorgeous.
And then you talk about the spine of the mountain. So we're talking about something that's a volcanic island with the mountains coming right out of the sea rather than a coral atoll, which is mostly flat.
Well, it's an interesting combination. It's definitely got some coral atoll stuff happening around the fringes. But yes, definitely more of a volcanic island. As far as I know, no volcano activity on Raratonga in many, many, many hundreds of years.
Okay. And what else did you do then besides the trek?
On Raratonga, I have to say it's pretty low-key. I would go to the farmer's market in the center of downtown being next to the port. It's not really what you're going to think of as a downtown, but it is kind of a trip, and it's a pretty big farmer's market. It happens pretty early in the morning. Unfortunately, I cannot, off the top of my head, think of the days involved, but it's definitely the kind of thing if you're going to be in Raratonga for any one of a few days, somebody will be able to tell you this in town. It's kind of the big thing going. Mm-hmm. And it's a great place to see locals and crafts and what produce is on offer and what people eat for treats.
So it sounds like you're heading to Raratonga or to the Cook Islands in general when you're looking for a break from the fast pace and more laid back and a different pace of things. So you don't go because there are so many things to do. You go because there are not as many things to do. There's lying at the beach.
That's exactly correct.
Okay.
I had a wonderful time with my husband. We rented a car on Raratonga and literally drove the entire 20-mile ring road in an afternoon just to go see the landscape change and see the interior and see how people live. This would probably bore some people to tears. We thought it was fascinating to see taro growing in really iron-rich soil and pigs kind of rooting around under huge trees we'd never seen before. Gorgeous ocean views. There's a beautiful church on Raratonga, which on Sunday you can stop outside of it and hear people singing. It'll bring tears to your eyes. Absolutely incredible. And that's on the north end of the island. I believe it's called Ararongi. I mean, there's just not that much to do, but yet somehow you can fill whole days of just sitting and staring and experiencing. It's lovely.
And then in terms of places to stay, it didn't sound like there are as many resorts that were not really at that level of tourism yet. You talked about Hawaii in the 50s. So are we in bungalows, or what are the different options?
Well, it's an interesting time. I mean, ironically, it's Hawaii in the 50s, but with kind of swanky resorts. So it's more a matter of the fact that the actual infrastructure on, say, Aitutaki is just a barely paved road. But you have these beautiful resorts, like the one that we stayed in, because I guess they just sort of launched in and prepared for that sort of infrastructure. Most of them are new within the last 10 years. We stayed in a wonderful place on Aitutaki called the Pacific Resort Aitutaki. It's run by this lovely guy, an expat Kiwi. His name is Michael Shaw. He has a staff there of people who are from Aitutaki. There's folks from Chile, which is kind of strange, although it turns out a lot of the produce is the same. When we were there, there was a masseuse from Zimbabwe. So there was this sort of wonderful mix of locals and expats, and we would recommend booking a small room or a villa. It's right on the sand. It's white and soft, and every night there's a lavender sunset with this blazing orange stripe, and it causes the really, really shallow lagoon to look kind of mirrored. I could have stayed there the rest of my life. Oftentimes, as it becomes nighttime, you can hear Polynesian drumming, and there'll be traditional storytelling dances in the restaurant. You don't have to go to the restaurant to experience it. You can hear this from your room far off. It sounds really mysterious. They do something called the cocktail of the moment, which I think is a fantastic idea no matter where you go.
And they're making things up, or they're...
No, it's fantastic. It's generally named for the newest guest at the resort that day. So you'll have like the McGillicuddy Starfruit Potion, just something fantastic. Like, why would you not want to drink that?
What was the drink that was named after you?
We did not get a drink named after us. We were there for something like 3 or 4 days, and nobody gave us a drink, which I think is kind of sad. I'm not really sure what goes with Waldman.
I think we should stop talking about them, clearly.
Clearly. Our favorite thing about the Pacific Resort Aitutaki, I could talk about it forever, the restaurant sits up on a rise and looks out over the lagoon. So you can basically sit still over a cappuccino and watch whales breaching just off there. Cool. You don't have to have any special equipment. You don't have to get in a boat. It was pretty much the most decadent thing I can imagine. It was amazing.
That's not on Raratongo. That's on the second island.
That's on Aitutaki. Basically, there's a long path in from the little tiny airport, and there are several resorts right over there that are swanky but comfortable still. There's a place that costs a little bit less than the Pacific Resort Aitutaki called Etu Moana, which also looks really nice. Not as fancy, but certainly the same sand, the same water. And that looked like another place that might be fun to stay. And
then the places to stay on Raratonga, similar?
No, Raratonga is a lot more expensive in my experience. There are hostels, there are smaller places to stay. We didn't see a lot of them. But the feedback we got from people we met is that oftentimes the smaller hostel places smell a little moldy. It rains a lot, obviously, and there's just a lot more visitors to Raratonga. It's bigger. It's a hub for cruise ships that have a South Pacific itinerary. The nature of it is far more touristy. Okay. Where we stayed was unusual for us. It was a beach villa without a lot of infrastructure. And it inexplicably had 2 bedrooms, so we weren't sure if it was meant for swingers or people who don't get along. It was a little odd, but certainly gorgeous. I would have gone families
with kids before I went with either of those, but okay.
Well done, sir. Well done, sir. Yes, that could definitely have been the thing. But it was a very romantic place, so it was just a little strange, the 2 bedrooms.
What was the biggest surprise about the Cook Islands?
Well, our biggest surprise was on Raratonga. I imagine that this is something that would not be a huge surprise to most people visiting there, but heading north from the south end of the island where we were staying, we stopped at one end of the Cross Island Trek. It's a little area called Vaimanga. There is basically a resort moldering there and being reclaimed by the jungle, sort of a la The World Without Us. This is actually Raratonga's greatest financial disgrace. It's an abandoned Sheraton that had been intended as the island's first 5-star hotel. They have since gotten a few hotels that look the part, but like either the service or the food isn't there. This was supposed to be the real deal. Back in 1987, this project had been awarded to this Italian guy, a contractor, who had been financed by an Italian government-owned bank. Later, when he had to default on his loans, it took years and years to get somebody else involved in building this thing. In the meantime, the Cook Islands government had put a $52 million guarantee with this Italian bank, and it's just a huge embarrassment because the entirety of that guarantee was lost. Rome defaulted on the bank loan ultimately, and they cited allegations of mafia corruption.
Oh, my.
Which is kind of sad, because anytime you get Italians involved, that really is not something you want to say. You don't want to say the M word. But it was a huge, huge disgrace for the Cook Islands government. And ever since 1993 is the last time anybody really worked on this thing. They were hoping to have it finished in 2007, but nobody really came forward with the money that was needed. So it is basically just being reclaimed by vines and trees, and it's kind of fascinating.
Who's the most memorable person you met?
I'm going to have to say there were two most memorable people that we met. One was Pa, because, I mean, when are you meeting a 70-year-old who can walk faster than you and has blonde dreadlocks and knows everything about everything? But there was a guy in Aitutaki named Na'a. He's a young guy whose passion is archeology and his Cook Islands Maori heritage. And he really took us through every corner of the island. He owns Aitutaki safari tours, and he was able to explain the meanings of tattoos and different ceremonial sites, different rites. You would walk into a field and see lots of round stones or holes, and that would have looked like absolutely nothing to us, and he was able to share with us the specific meanings of each detail. He's not a big fan of the church. He's not a big fan of New Zealand's involvement in the Cook Islands. That was kind of an interesting perspective. I think he may well have been the most fascinating person we met on our trip.
Interesting. And the best day you had was what?
The best day we had was a private lagoon cruise around Aitutaki. There are 15 little islets called motus just offshore from Aitutaki proper. We got to see 6 of these all by ourselves with a guy called, I swear to God, Captain Awesome. And and he literally looks like Polynesian Fred Flintstone. You just want to hug him, except that he's just too huge. He took us on an incredible, incredible tour. We saw sea turtles. We had several of these little motus to ourselves for quite a while. I mean, I don't know if you've ever kissed your wife on a little desert island in the middle of nowhere, but it was really the most romantic day. And one thing that was really especially cool about that is there's one little islet called Akiami, and on it is this series of beach huts, which I thought was really surprising. We were alone there, we thought, until this Italian couple came out of the trees, and it turned out they were staying there by themselves for the entire week. I remember our boat pulling away from them, and I was thinking, my God, that's both the loneliest and most exciting thing I can imagine. Because, I mean, we'd had these places to ourselves for, a half an hour maybe, but to stay an entire week in the middle of nowhere, it was kind of a trip.
Did you have any recommendations from like the guidebooks or for other resources you used for something that they thought you should do that you didn't think was worthwhile, or other things that they missed?
Didn't use guidebooks for a whole lot of stuff. It is how I found Pa for the Cook Islands trek, but I pretty much decided to put my guidebooks away. I used the Cook Islands tourism site to learn about all of the different islands that I didn't get a chance to visit. But later, when I looked at guidebooks, there were a few things that I missed. The most exciting thing is that most tourists will never see the shipping container arrive in Aitutaki. It comes once a month. It's a little like a summer camp when it's care package day.
Sure.
Because most goods there have to come from elsewhere, and that's usually New Zealand. And again, same story as with the little planes. If the weather is bad, the ship can't get through, can't get past the lagoon edge. If it does, it's the biggest thing going on that day, and everybody wants to see what everyone else got. I don't think you'd find out about that in a guidebook.
Interesting. Picturesque place, I'm assuming. What picture that you took really captured the Cook Islands for you?
Early morning, about 6:30, stepping outside of my beach hut in Aitutaki and watching herons move very, very slowly from rock to rock across the absolutely still and shallow lagoon. And they would just be looking very carefully for fish, nobody bothering them. That, to me, was Aitutaki and the Cook Islands.
What is the population?
It's a very good question. A lot of people have some very different ideas. Off the top of my head, I'm going to say just a few hundred on Aitutaki and just a few thousand on Raratongo. We're not talking about a large population.
Wow, interesting.
A lot of the people who live on Raratonga, for instance, are not there all year long. They're Kiwis that have a summer place.
What do you wish you had known before you went?
I don't know. It was a wonderful place to just sort of let it unfold. I was actually glad that I didn't know more than I did. I didn't want to have a bunch of preconceived notions about a culture I'd never experienced firsthand. I'd been to Hawaii several times, but it's a very, very different experience than being so remote. So I don't know. I would say nothing. There's a few things that I would definitely avoid eating in the Cook Islands. It kind of depends on your goals.
Avoid eating, okay.
Avoid eating. It depends on your goals with your vacation, but I personally would avoid a leafy shrub with pink flowers. It's apparently called Island Viagra. If you decide to go for it and you steep the leaves into a tea, just make sure that both of you drink it in order to avoid any disagreements. I would also avoid eating sea cucumber, and I wish I was making this up. They are completely disgusting mollusks that line the seabeds right on the shore in Aitutaki. You definitely want to bring water shoes because of these little guys. They basically are a delicacy to Cook Islanders who pick them up and suck out their innards, kind of like an ocean cannoli. I kind of get a little bit sick just thinking about it. We were told they were very high in protein. I'm not really sure that's a selling point, but I would instead go for something called ikamata, which is a Polynesian ceviche of whitefish marinated in coconut milk. Totally not disgusting.
Okay. As we go to wind this down, finish this sentence for me. You really know you're in the Cook Islands when what?
When you are the only person on the ring road, and it's you and a goat tied to a string and a fruit you've never seen before, and you look over and you see the grave of someone's ancestor in their front yard and completely covered with flowers. That's the Cook Islands to me.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize the Cook Islands in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Remote and lovely.
Excellent. Melanie, thanks so much for coming on The Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your trip to the Cook Islands.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And one more time, if people want to read about your trip, where should they go?
To travelswith2.com, and I have a section underneath Oceania on the Cook Islands.
Excellent. Thanks so much for coming on The Amateur Traveler.
Thank you.
This episode of The Amateur Traveler is sponsored by Audible.com. If you want to get a 14-day free trial, including a free book, just go to amateurtraveler.com/free book. The book that I'm reading right now is a nonfiction book called Groundswell about the use of social media. And remember, the July 8th deadline for the Egypt photo tour is rapidly approaching. I may be able to get you on the tour after July 8th, but I certainly can before then because we have a number of slots reserved. So if you're interested in going, this would be a really good week to decide, so let me know. I was surprised how much controversy the Michigan episode caused, both because some people thought that Eric was denigrating Detroit and didn't say enough nice things about Detroit. You can check out that exchange of comments on that episode. And then also there was a fact that we want to correct, and that is that Thomas Edison was not born in New Jersey, although we said on the show he was from New Jersey. He was born apparently in Ohio. And as someone who was also born in Ohio, I guess we'll claim him as a Buckeye. As of June 30th, we did give away a photo printer in that contest, and Ralph will be judging the photo contest to give away a copy of his book very soon, and then I will announce probably on the Facebook page whether or not there will be a July photo contest. So check that out, facebook.com/amateurtraveler. With that, since I'm tired of using this voice and I'm hoping I'll be in better voice by next week, we're going to wrap this show up. If you have a comment, feel free to leave it on this episode at amateurtraveler.com, or drop me an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or follow me on Twitter at either Chris2X or Amateur Traveler. And especially with 5 years under our belt, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe.